Taphephobia. It's the irrational fear of being buried alive. But it wasn't always irrational. Apparent death was pretty common during times of epidemics like plague, cholera, and smallpox, where so many people were dying, medical professionals didn't have time to check everyone to make sure they were in fact, well, dead. In 1896, William Tebb published a whole book about being buried alive in the UK. It's about 400 pages and lists 219 instances of narrow escape from premature burial, 149 cases of actual premature burial, 10 cases in which bodies were accidentally dissected before death, and 2 cases in which embalming was started on the living.
There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
But as recently as the 1990s, we have a documented case of somebody pronounced dead saying, "Not so fast." So, how worried should I be about being buried alive? Several notable historical figures seem to have been terrified about being buried alive. Pianist Chopin was a taphephobe, and according to an article in Nature, his last words were, "Swear to make them cut me open so that I won't be buried alive." His sister obliged and had his heart removed after death just to make sure. George Washington, the brave father of the US of A, who defied a king, was so scared of being buried alive, he requested to be laid out for 3 days after death just to make sure. According to Dr. John Bondison, rheumatologist and author of the book Buried Alive, The Terrifying History of Our Most Primal Fear, this all started in the 17th century.
Standard use of coffins in the 17th century began to make people a little worried what would happen if they were not really dead when the coffin was put 6 feet under.
To freak people out a little bit more, a French doctor published a sensational book claiming that people were getting buried alive a lot. Like, a lot. The book was translated into English, German, Latin, Swedish, and people began to believe it could happen to them. In the 18th and 19th centuries, people were so scared, entrepreneurs tried to profit from it, creating lavish security coffins with alarms and air pipes. Some had strings tied from the dead's limbs to a bell above ground, so if you were alive, you could move and be saved by the bell. And nope, that's not where the phrase came from. Then the fear infiltrated pop culture. Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Premature Burial, about a man terrified by his fears of being laid to rest before he actually died.
To be buried while alive is beyond question the most terrific of these extremes which has ever fallen to the lot of mere mortality.
And even though medical science has come a long way since the 17th and 18th centuries, this fear is still something we see in pop culture today. But nobody could possibly be buried alive in this day and age, could they? The odds of you getting buried alive are 1 in, well, we don't really know, because if you ended up buried alive, nobody would find out, right? Sorry, bad joke. There are, however, some documented near misses. In 1994, 86-year-old Mildred C. Clark spent about an hour and a half in a body bag at Albany Medical Center Hospital before someone noticed she was breathing. They had found her cold and motionless with no heartbeat or breath, so the coroner pronounced her dead. Well, after they got her out of that body bag, she lived another week. A Russian woman who collapsed after a heart attack in 2011 was declared dead, and it wasn't until her own funeral when she woke up in her casket.
It's alive!
So how likely is it to happen? Dr. Bondison says if you live in the developed world, it's just not going to happen. Doctors and morticians are pretty good nowadays with technology, like EKGs and EEGs, and if a doctor says you're dead, you're probably dead. Most mistaken cases are due to one of the following somewhat common medical disorders: catalepsy, hypothermia, and bradycardia. But if you live in the developing world, your chances could be higher. In fact, Bondison says some countries' medical professionals are using similar criteria as the 19th century, which is alarming. But even there, being buried alive is a rare occurrence. But if you are going to get buried alive, it's more likely to happen in a natural disaster, like an earthquake, avalanche, hurricane, or maybe even after a dispute with the mafia.
Come on.
Actually, that one didn't really happen that way. Even the mafia won't bury you alive. So how worried should you be about getting buried alive? You should probably
Forget about it.